Shalom, everybody. Welcome to Kabbalah 101. Today, we're going to be discussing the dimensions of time and space. It's going to be a fun show. Sit tight. We will be right back. Welcome to Tanakh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live out of Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Kabbalah 101, the science of Kabbalah. Today's discussion, the dimensions of time and space, with my dear friend, Ira Michelson, ex-Ira Michelson. All this time I've been waiting for so long to call you Rav, and now that you got the Rabbi, I slipped on it. Rav Yitzchak Michelson, Baruch Hashem.
I'm the ex-Ira Michelson.
That's funny. Good deal. Well, it's so good to have you back in the studio again, Rabbi. Such a great pleasure always working with you. Love your smile, love your approach, your message. It's all good and awesome.
I know. The smile is because we were late getting started because I was telling you about what was going on here in Sfat, and this guy got me so upset that I was posting on his, he just had the nerve to post on his Facebook page. He's saying, "Who's claiming I'm a missionary?"
Oh my gosh. Wow.
GoFundMe page. I mean, here the guy says so for the listeners that are listening, we just had a Christian missionary show up in Sfat at a Kiruv. Kiruv is an all Jewish outreach organization in Sfat that will occasionally allow, not occasionally, they do allow non-Jews to come and learn. It's an outreach organization run by Chabad, but they're very open to people coming. It really is meant for Jewish people that are non-affiliated, that are trying to come back to Judaism or learn about Judaism and learn about Kabbalah. But they do allow non-Jews to come. As a matter of fact, there was a young woman that was staying there that we hosted for Shabbat this past Shabbat. But this guy showed up there as well, was staying there, and a couple of my guys, I call them my guys because I have my little undercover team working here in Sfat, found this guy in that organization claiming to be Jewish. He even sat at the Shabbat table of other friends of mine claiming he was Jewish. And I sent William the Facebook page and the GoFundMe page of this guy where he clearly states that he's, been a missionary for 25 years and, outreach to Israel and blah, 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 blah. And now he's trying to interact with people on Facebook and says, I never tried to proselytize anybody. And
you know what I never could understand about these people that do this? And I granted they say they have their reasons and their justification, but in the New Testament alone, it says Jesus said, if you deny me before men, right, I'll deny you before his Father in heaven, so to speak. And I'm thinking that's what they go around doing all the time, is denying that they believe in Jesus, And so, of course, they justify it all, but at the end of the day, it's still very, very sleazy, in my opinion.
Well, look, I know we used to do a lot of this when I used to be on the show, and I know the show is supposed to be about Kabbalah, but just to give you an idea of I want people to understand when they're listening to me that I do not have a problem with missionaries, so to speak. I don't have a problem with an honest Christian that says, as soon as they walk up to my face, hey, I'm a Christian missionary, and I'm here to preach the gospel to you. I don't have a problem with that.
Right.
So I know how to deal with somebody like that. I can interact with somebody like that because we're starting off on an honest foot. But somebody that comes to a Jewish organization that claims he's Jewish and then is trying to worm out of the whole thing and play off as, the poor woe is me. He's taking selfies of himself in front of garbage pail saying dejected and rejected, from, yesterday having been thrown out of the thing. But this is what his GoFundMe says. I was invited to travel with a team of believers to Israel in May. Our team spent 2 to 3 hours in worship and prayer each day and engaged in experimental outreaches during our time there. We've visited local houses of prayer, met with various leaders, encountered the locals, and continue to receive God's strategy for reaching his people. My role as a messenger in this grand story is to bring the good news of Messiah back to the Jews, Arabs, and others living in the Holy Land. As part of a team of laborers, we hope to share his incredible love in Israel for years to come. My efforts are focused on serving the local houses of worship and their leaders by demonstrating God's love for his people through works of service, by simply finding and filling a need. Building relationships with established leaders in the community opens doors to doing future outreaches in the community. Community relationships are an important avenue to reach people in the community. I'm a laborer preparing the fields. That's not a missionary?
Right, exactly. That's 100%.
I mean, come on. Be real, dude. Be honest. Own it. You're a missionary. You get caught. Move on. Go somewhere else, because he's not going to be able to show his face in Sfat. I can tell you that. Everybody knows who he is now, and we're a small town. You can't walk down the street without being recognized. Right. So he 21 hours ago, heartbroken. Tonight, someone who I respect and admire looked me in the eye and called me an enemy. My spirit is grieved, my soul is cast down. Oy vey.
Poor guy. Unbelievable.
I feel bad for him. I don't know what to do.
Right.
Maybe I should invite him over here.
There you go. Actually, invite him over and then act like you are following his lead, and then lead him on. Let me put it this way: somebody tried to scam me on Craigslist once, and I knew they were trying to scam me by the way that they were communicating with me, by the way the whole thing was going. I just knew it was a scam from the very beginning. And they said, here's the deal. They said, I'll send you a money order, and then you can just cash the money order at your bank, and blah blah blah, and you send me this much back, and then and you can send this, pay for the shipping. You keep the leftover money. Is what they were saying, right? Mm-hmm. And so I just played along with it. What the heck? I figured just waste this guy's time anyway. So we went on for like I don't know, several weeks swapping safe information on my end, and finally I get this money order in the bank, and then not in the bank, but I get this money order, and I went and delivered it to the bank for them to actually turn into the FBI or whatever it is, crime scene stuff that they do. I don't know how they do all that stuff, but I bet that guy was like really, really not happy he spent so much time and energy on me. But anyway, so yeah, it's really sad. I mean, it's really the thing that, like you said, people who are honest about their identity, that's one thing, but when they try to trick you, just to get their foot in the door, that friendship evangelism thing, where they just act like they're on your side and hold on yard just to try to get you to change. It's really nasty, in my opinion.
In any situation, and I'm not even talking about missionaries now, just in general in life, eventually, if you're going to lie, you're going to be caught. You're going to be caught in your own lies, and you're going to trip over your own lies, because you're never going to remember what you lied to one person about and what you said to this other person. Especially if you're talking about missionaries, because he's not going to remember who he told he was Jewish to and who he didn't tell he was Jewish to, who he told he wasn't Jewish. And,
right.
That's what ended up really sinking this guy is, here he comes into town, his GoFundMe, and it's not the first, he thinks he's dealing with people that don't know the deal. I mean, come on, folks. I was on staff with Jews for Judaism. I work with Yad Lachim. Here, I can tell the difference between somebody who's legitimately seeking a relationship with the Creator and is having questions and doubts, and somebody who clearly is, is looking to practice what you just said, this idea of friendship and relationship evangelism, where they're, and this is a new thing. They think we're idiotic or stupid, but we know that their new agenda is to infiltrate synagogues and kiruv organizations. It's not the first time that we've had this. People have done this before, and they continue to do this, and it's one of the new targets. It's basically what they do is they come in, and it's not just in Israel, all over in America as well. They go into places and they're trying to learn Jewish practices. They're trying to see how we worship and the kind of things that we do, so that they can fit in, so that they don't look like they're stand when they walk into a shul. So they know how the worship service works and what to do and how to put on a talit and and how to not look like stick out like a sore thumb when they walk into a place. But typically they'll always stumble over something. And I had to laugh because this guy only has 3 mutual friends of mine. He's not on my friend list, but one of them is one of the guys that helped uncover him. And another guy who wasn't his friend yesterday, who's his friend today, is another guy who we know is also an issue here in town that we've been watching for the last several months. Yesterday, he wasn't friends with this guy, and now suddenly he friended this guy within the last 24 hours. Because I only found out the outcome late last night in Motzei Shabbat, where one of the rabbis at the organization, let me know that they were asking him to leave, that he was leaving after Shabbat. They weren't going to put him out on the street during Shabbat, but yesterday morning he was out on the street.
Wow. Well, that's a nice note to leave on. Yeah. For sure. So, all right. Well, good deal. Well, I guess we can go ahead and kick this class off for the day. And so if you want to, just a quick summary in case people are just now tuning in, just a quick recap of last week, and then just kick this thing off, and we'll have some fun with it.
So what we've been talking about is, it's really hard to go back in time, but what we talked about was we were talking about the significance of light, and we talked about things like the supernova 1987A, which was a supernova that exploded 160,000 light years from Earth and arrived early morning, February 24th, 1987, to be seen in the southern hemisphere down in South America by some scientists who were just about ready to give up for the day and saw this speck on a photograph, went outside and saw this visible light that was actually visible until May of 1987, and it turns out it was the explosion or the death of a star. And we were talking about it as it relates to time, and how 160,000 light years away means that it took literally 160,000 years for that light to arrive at that time, February 24th, the morning of February 24th, 1987. But we argued also that when you discuss the idea of time and the speed of light and so forth, that really, as mind-boggling as it is, that 160,000 years was really no time at all. That if you were able to, it's impossible, if you were able to sit in a spaceship that was able to go at the speed of light and travel along with that light during that period of time, during those 160,000 light years, that when you arrived that morning, February 24th, 1987, no time would have passed by.
So it's like having a piece of paper and drawing a dot on one side and a dot on the other side and folding the piece of paper in half and lining them up. It's like they can really overlap.
Pretty much. That's what ends up happening when you're talking about the significance of light and time and space. When you look at it from a scientific perspective. And I've said over the course of a few classes, the reason why we're going so heavily in the first couple of shows in the science aspect is to show you not that science proves what we already believe as Jews, but that we believed these things way before science came to these conclusions, that science is only now catching up. And what I said was in one of the previous classes that it takes much more faith to believe in what science is trying to push at you than it does to believe in the Torah. Because the Torah will always prove itself to be true, where science constantly comes up with new theories, and those theories are not necessarily laws just yet. Something will start off as a theory. Let's say Einstein coming up with the concept of E equal mc squared, the famous formula, started out as a theory until it became law. But let's say we're talking about something like the Big Bang theory. We call it a Big Bang theory. We don't call it a Big Bang law.
Right.
The Big Bang theory is a theory that the universe started by this Big Bang, similar, and the reason why we're talking about it is similar in nature to the supernova that exploded in 1987, or 160,000 light years away from 1987. In a similar way, that's the way science posits that the universe was created, through this death of a star, or this explosion that took place that produced all of the elements necessary to both produce and sustain life at the same time. So that's where we had left off. We had just started talking about quantum mechanics, and there's a new, and we had also talked about, just before we started talking about quantum mechanics, we were talking about the fact that about electromagnetism, the idea that I'm trying to remember who the scientist was. I'm actually looking for it in my notes. The scientist that came up with that concept of electromagnetism, where he took the two concepts together, realizing that, that electricity, that the energy produced magnetism, and the idea that we have this electromagnetism. There's a very interesting concept, taking it one step further from this notion of quantum mechanics. So let's start talking about that a little bit first. So for instance, I'm not a physicist, and I'm sure you're not either.
Right.
And while I can say it, everybody's heard of E equal MC squared, and I can mention it time and time again, it doesn't mean that I understand it, or you understand it, or anybody who's listening to us understands it. And I'm sure there are some people that don't even know what E equal MC squared means. So just for the sake of, a little bit of understanding, the formula actually breaks down as this. E represents energy, M equals mass, stands for mass, and C relates to the velocity of light, squared. So the C, it's E equal MC squared, or energy equals mass, and the velocity of light squared. So what this did was, with Einstein coming up with this, it revealed to us that energy and matter are two sides of the same coin and are exchangeable in a way. Kind of like you talked about that dot, folding it over, that they're two sides of the same coin. So instead of using the analogy of the paper with a dot on it, it's like if you had a coin with two heads, on it instead of a heads and tails.
Right.
It would be that kind of thing. And it's through the knowledge of that formula of E equal MC squared that the idea of converting small amounts of matter into enormous amounts of energy came up with the idea of atomic power. This is where we got the notion of how atomic power is produced, through that formula as well. So, but what's really revolutionary for the purposes of what we're talking about, and what I call the science of Kabbalah, is how this reveals concepts related to Kabbalah. So let's look at it like we don't even have to look at it like where I would say, let's consider each one of us as a vessel, because we are.
Right.
The Hebrew word is kli, or kelim in the plural. Kelim is vessels, kli is the singular for vessels. So each one of us is a kli. We're meant to be a vessel to contain, at least from Kabbalah, to contain the light of the Creator. Okay? And as vessels, we are in essence matter. And as matter, we're also considered a condensed form of light, which is also energy. Okay, so we fit into that same formula. But what we haven't touched on is not only this idea of quantum mechanics, but also this concept of quantum biology. Okay, and there are some things that are just out of this world when it comes to this subject. Things that I never knew about until I'd never studied until I decided to compare Kabbalah to a science. And when I started researching what science teaches, even I got this great awakening about some of the things that even Albert Einstein called spooky. I thought it was very funny when I read about Einstein calling this concept spooky. There's an example of this concept that ties all together, like electromagnetism and the idea of like the magnetic field. I don't know if you're aware of this, but like our Earth, because of the Earth, the core of the Earth being, magma, so to speak, and metal, there's a magnetic field that exists around the Earth. Believe it or not, that magnetic field is actually weaker than the fridge magnet that you have on your refrigerator that most everybody has. At least I know I have a lot of them because my wife loves them. We probably bring back a fridge magnet or get them from my sister when she comes back from traveling. So we have refrigerator magnets from all over the world. The magnetic field that exists around the Earth is actually 100 times weaker than the average refrigerator magnet that you have on your refrigerator. And there's a reason why I'm telling you this. Every year, think about this, okay? Every year, there's this one particular species of European robins that head south for the winter. Now, that's not unusual because we know all kinds of birds head south for the winter. We know this from the time that we were little kids. We were taught that. These particular robins travel around 2,000 miles. And it's not that they travel such a long distance that makes this amazing. It's the way in which they navigate that's different than the way most birds navigate, and it's just totally different. And Albert Einstein called this spooky. What they do is, unlike other species that are migratory that use landmarks and use ocean currents and use the sun, for instance, these European robins actually are able to detect the Earth's magnetic field.
That's wild.
And it's not only that they can detect the magnetic field, like I said, which is 100 times weaker than the average refrigerator magnet, but they're actually able to see the magnetic field as well. They've done research on it, and these birds not only can sense it, but they can see the magnetic field as well. And this is a process that, like I said, Albert Einstein called spooky. In essence, these robins somehow have this built-in compass that uses the concept of quantum mechanics. Not that, so I'm only using that as an example to show you how quantum mechanics works, not getting into it because, again, it's even too lofty a subject for me. I'm not, I'm by no means a physicist. I try to do the best I can as a Kabbalist and as a rabbi.
Right.
It's enough for me to, I actually, it's funny because when I graduated from high school, I originally decided to go into the Navy. I was going to go into the Navy, and I was actually going into the nuclear power program. I was supposed to be stationed out of Groton, Connecticut on a nuclear powered sub. And in order to get into the nuclear power program, you had to sign up for 6 years and you had to pass a physics test. And I had never studied physics in high school. And I had to take a physics test. And I'm a pretty bright kid. I'm not saying that in a arrogant way. I guess most people know that I'm a fairly intelligent guy. I just barely passed it. I got just barely a passing grade when I took the test and was approved for it. The issue was physical. I failed a physical. I had a broken leg when I played football when I was younger, and there was a cyst on the bone where I broke my leg. Evidently, the doctor, the orthopedic surgeon, told me that it was gone, but when I went to a physical, when I had my physical in the service, they decided to do an orthopedic consult, and did an X-ray, and sure enough, the cyst was still there. So they denied me entry into the service. So,
Wow.
so anyway,
you were talking about the
so you,
magnetism and
birds.
things.
So that is an example of quantum mechanics meeting quantum biology. This idea that you have a magnetic field that can be sensed, but that can be not only sensed but felt by these birds, unlike other birds who typically navigate by landmarks and by the sun and by ocean currents and things like that, which is typically how migratory species work. And the reason like I said, that I'm presenting things like this is to really show how there's a narrowing of the gap between science and spirituality, or science, or what I call physicality and spirituality.
Right, gotcha.
In fact, the same way we describe matter and energy being two sides of the same coin that we just talked about, and that there are these types of duality, which we talked about previously in the last Kabbalah 101 we talked about duality as it relates to electricity and magnetism, as it relates to light and time, and we're going to continue to see these dualities or paradoxes that science keeps coming up with. We can also say that the realms in the spiritual and the physical are present us with the same kind of duality and paradox, but at the same time being two sides of the same coin, so to speak, when you're looking at the kind of information that we're looking at. So when we look back at Einstein for a minute, we know that he was this brilliant guy, and he was considered one of the greatest physicists in history. What's really interesting about him is if you really look at the way he came up, he wasn't so accepted at the beginning in the world of physics, and it's very interesting to look at his life story. I think there was also in America not a documentary, but they did a show recently. I think my sister was telling me about it. Listeners might want to look into it, where they went into a little bit more about his personal life and how he became, this very well-known, brilliant physicist. The one thing that was interesting was that in all of his time, and as brilliant as he was, he continually tried to come up with what's called a unified field theory, which in essence was meant to combine gravity and electromagnetism into a single theory. That's what he was trying to do. And in all the years, even though he was a Nobel Prize winner and all these different things, he was unable in all of the years to come up with a unified field theory, and he considered that to be his greatest failure. The fact that, and he didn't stop working on it until his last breath, until the dying day, trying to come up with the unified field theory, and he was just never able to do it. There are those that think that the reason why he wasn't able to come up with the unified field theory is because he was ahead of his time, that he was really coming up with theories and formulas that were so far ahead of his time that the tools that were needed to prove out the kind of things that he was trying to prove weren't available when he was alive. The greatest paradox to me is that while physicists have made these great strides in the fields of science, none have yet to be able to come up with a testable and provable theory, even following in Einstein's footsteps. So that's the thing that's comical to me, and why I reiterate over and over again that in bringing so much of the science to the forefront in these first few shows is not meant to somehow say that science has the answer. It's to show you that, look, with all their brilliance and with all their theories and all of the things that they do uncover for us and show us, like these amazing things about these birds. Yet still, even though we're talking about Einstein being gone since the 1950s and them thinking if he only had the tools that are available today, yet they do have the tools, and yet still they have still not been able to come up with a testable and provable theory to this day. Even when you watch a show like The Big Bang Theory, I don't know, I'm sure some of your listeners probably watch television. There's a famous show called The Big Bang Theory where they have these young physicists on, very funny show, and they're always talking about concepts that we're going to talk about. Maybe, I don't know that we'll get to it today, but we will get to it at some point. The idea of string theory and black holes,
right?
And science is talking about today as it relates to that, because you'll often hear the characters talking about string theory and superstring theory and black holes and so forth. And all of those things, believe it or not, can be tied into the concepts that we're going to talk about in Kabbalah, because when we get into discussing things like the Eitz Chaim, what we call the tree of life, and we talk about the different sephirot, the different emanations or attributes of the Creator, you'll start to see how it lines up with what science talks about in string theory, only being able to prove their theories if there's what's called an 11-dimensional theory. Why is that significant? Some people say, well, what does that have to do with anything? They're talking about 11 dimensions and there are only 10 sephirot. Well, actually, there are more than 10 sephirot. There are the 10 sephirot, and then there's the one hidden that sits in between chokhmah and binah, that's called da'at, that's called knowledge. Right. Chokhmah being wisdom and binah being understanding. And there's the invisible one that sits as attached to keter, which is the upper one, which means crown of the upper sephirot. There's the 11th. What do they call the 11th dimensional theory in physics? The 11th is time, which exists outside of what's called spatial dimensions that we work with every day. You certainly work with what's called spatial dimensions, with width, height, and length. When you built out your studio, you had to measure things. You had to cut pieces of wood and lumber to certain lengths and certain widths, and use certain widths for trusses and for floorboards and for 2x4s, maybe for, before you put up sheetrock, and maybe 2x6s for the flooring, and a different width and different heights for cross beams and things like that. You understand, so you know what it is to deal with what we call spatial dimensions. But there's that one dimension that exists outside of spatial dimensions that we deal with, and that's the dimension of time. And we're going to go into that in a much deeper way at some point.
Okay. Sounds good.
Where are we? Let's see.
As you were mentioning magnetism earlier, I was thinking about a video I saw. There was an experimental thing set up at the equator. I wonder if I can actually put that. I probably could put that on the screen. I might do that for you guys in a while. But they have spaced about maybe 40 feet apart. They've got these three cones that are painted. Inside these cones, they're about the size of a turkey pan. I mean, it's pretty large. It's basically a funnel. Actually, this cone is more like a funnel with a bucket underneath it. And so what they'll do is they've got these black swirls painted, like an arrow painted the direction the water will flow on either side of the equator. And so what they'll do is fill the bucket up. They got this little petal, this little rose flower petal, and they drop it right in the center, so you can see the water turning the petal one way or the other. And these things are sitting, just like I said, maybe 20 to 40 feet apart. I'm not really sure. One on the equator and then one on either side. And it's amazing to see how close, because I mean, in my mind, I've always pictured the whole magnetism thing to be kind of more gradual in a sense, and I guess it is. But this shows how quickly it changes, just from being like just barely off of the equator, just by a couple feet. It's quite amazing to see this thing. It's like unbelievable. I showed my daughter one time. We were doing something to say fill the sink up, and as the water started draining down, I said, "Now take your finger and try to direct it the other way," and she couldn't. It kept going back the other way, and she was quite amazed by that. I was too. So anyway, carry on.
Yeah, science is no, and it's like it's good that you're interrupting because we're going to have to get used to this. I mean, we haven't talked about something very important that we need to talk about.
Okay.
Something unrelated.
Okay.
Because we haven't really, other than you promoting it personally, we haven't really talked about it much. But so people know, I am returning to the radio soon with a new co-host. Returning to Israel News Talk Radio, doing what we're doing now, but we'll be able to go into more detail and do interviews with people and get into some interesting topics on the science of Kabbalah. Returning to Israel News Talk Radio, and my new co-host is going to be you. Well,
yay! I'm excited about that. That's going to be fun. I don't know what's more exciting, doing the show or not having to host it.
Again?
I'm not sure what excites me more, actually being on the show with you or not having to host it.
Right, but I'm like excited because I just realized I have launched so many different things in my life. I mean, Rod, I brought Rod into radio with me years ago, and Tanakh Talk, I helped to kind of launch, so to speak, in the background, and now launching your radio career.
Right. People tell me I do have a face for radio, so that's I don't know if that's a compliment or what, but
so well, we're certainly going to see if you have a voice for it. I
Cool.
think people like to hear, and I think it's good. So you need to interrupt me more because,
okay.
And these are like lofty concepts. So
sure.
I don't have a problem if you interrupt and ask. There is no silly questions when it comes to this, especially when it comes to a lofty subject like Kabbalah. And I don't want people to get bored by me just droning on about things, and then
sure.
I promise them that by next week, we're going to get into some scripture, and then it's going to get really, really interesting.
Speaking of that, if you're watching for the first time, you need to go back and watch episode 1 because there's a lot of statements, declarations that you need to understand before making a decision on watching the show. One of which I've covered that is the thing that drove me to research this topic out more is seeing actual things in the scriptures that support true Kabbalah, not. I hate to keep saying that, but not Madonna Kabbalah. It's different.
Well,
you know what I mean?
It's okay. I mean, one of the things that, when we were discussing bringing the show back not bringing it back, but when we were discussing the idea of bringing the show to the radio, and after I had filled in for Tamar for the 3 shows while she was away, was, we were discussing it, and one of the things I told her was how much I disliked the word mysticism. Mm-hmm. I think all too often the idea that Kabbalah is related to mysticism is wrong. I delve into a little bit more in the course that I'm writing on this subject, why I decided to call it the science of Kabbalah. And if you look up the definition of science, rather than me explaining it, if somebody looks up the definition of science, just by Googling like Webster's dictionary or whatever, you'll understand why I chose to call it the science of Kabbalah. I not only call it the science of Kabbalah, but I call it the Kabbalah itself. I talked about in one of the first 2 shows that Kabbalah means reception, even in modern Hebrew. It's even
right.
relates to the idea of reception desk. Like when you go to the hospital, there's a reception desk, and it's called Kabbalah. That's where you go to check in. So I call it the science of reception because it's all about receiving, but it's receiving in order to give. That's the whole Kabbalah in a nutshell, William. We could do one show on it, and just if we could get people to understand the concept that we are, it's the science of reception, but only receiving what's good from Hashem, what's good from the Creator, in order to give out to the world and keep selfishly for yourself, then the world would transform. We would have Mashiach, we would have the Olam Haba, we would have the world to come, and we'd all be singing joyfully and happy.
And I want to paint a picture for, because this is something that helps me. Because what you just explained, your motive for doing it, your motive for researching this out, you hear stories on the news all the time about corrupt cops, police officers. For a person who joins the police force because he's dedicated to protecting and for serving the people, is one thing, and then you have those who want to be a cop because they want to be in authority. They want to be an authority figure. They want people to look at them for what they are, as opposed to really doing it for the right reason, which is to serve and to protect. And so there is a huge difference. And when you meet a police officer that's on one side and then a police officer's on the other side, it's very, very clear. Believe me, when you see, and many of you can already tell this already. So it's just one example of many.
Well, it's not. You can talk about that with rabbis as well.
For sure, right. Good point.
You're talking about the difference between somebody who's looking for kavod, for the what we call honor or glory, looking for their own honor to be. I always used to tell people, they'd say, well, what makes you the guy that's, teaching us and standing up there or whatever? And I said, do you remember when you were in school and if you were a troublemaking kid that the teacher would make you sit in front of the class so she could keep an eye on you? I said, that's what Hashem has done to me. He's only given me a position and people, the only reason people know about me is because Hashem has to keep me in the front of the class because he needs to keep an eye on me. Troublemaker.
That's awesome. That's funny.
It has nothing to do with
right.
Seeking kavod or honor or whatever, which I get accused of sometimes.
Right.
I mean, last night it's funny when I called out this missionary that we talked about at the beginning of the show. I posted his information last night after Shabbat, and somebody who knows me actually called me out and claimed that I was not doing this for pure intentions. They ended up pulling their thread down that they accused me on because when I called them out on the concept of, I said, you're talking to me about my need to work on myself.
Mm-hmm.
How are you working on yourself by publicly accusing me of something?
Right.
It's just amazing how people work. So, but believe me, if I was doing this for money or kavod or anything else, I would be picking a different line of work. Believe me.
That's how I feel about this too, no doubt. I get accused from time to time too of people, more people who were ex-Christian not ex-Christian, who are Christian, and they have told me over the years, so you're just trying to get attention from whatever. And I'm like, you know what? If I want it's the same thing. If I wanted attention, I'd be spending money on advertising. I would be going out of my way. I wouldn't have guests on the show. I would be the guest. I would be the one teaching. But that's not what I want. I mean, the whole point is, there's a need for what you do. There's a need for teachers in general, which is where I'm at now. And I didn't ask to do this. I was kind of told to do this. And I'm not saying spiritually like this super spiritual who God spoke to me. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that Rabbi Tovia Singer told me, William, this is what I want. And I'm like, he said, can you do it? I'm like, well, sure. Yeah, let's do it. And we did it. And of course, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have been that inspired to move forward anyway. So it wasn't something that I actually planned. It just sort of like fell into place, and it just kind of like continued to grow and continued to transform from then. So it's not about looking for anything,
To this day, I'm still surprised when people know who I am, believe it or not. I mean, it's when I was invited somewhere for Shabbat for lunch yesterday, and when we sat down at the table, we were going around the room and introducing ourselves, and I didn't give my last name. I just said that first my wife went, Leah went, and then I shared a little bit about myself, and I said something. I think I said something about the radio, and then the woman said to me, "Is your last name Michelson?" And I said, "Yeah." She goes, "Were you on Arut Sheva?" And I said, "Yeah, I used to have." She goes, "Now I recognize that the voice." And the husband's like, "Nah, I thought I recognized his voice, but I couldn't figure out where I knew it from."
That's funny.
Because they had just made Aliyah like a year ago to Tzfat from America, but I guess they used to listen in the States when I had A Light to the Nations on Arad Sheva. So
right. Okay, so I'm going to steer you back into it since I distracted you a little bit by storytelling.
So before we move too far ahead, I just wanted to. So while we're discussing kind of the scientific implications related to time and space and their connection to Kabbalah, you need to understand that there are different opinions within what's called the Jewish Masorah, or the Jewish tradition, what the sages have to, not just the sages teach on, but what Judaism accepts in general. In other words, there are many people who would disagree with many of the theories being put forth by modern science, including things like the Big Bang Theory. And I want it understood. Again, I repeat this over and over again, so people, especially if there are Jewish people, observant Jews, listening to the show, and think that somehow I am straying from Masorah, or trying to present something that goes against what Judaism is teaching. I'm not. What I'm simply doing is providing the evidence that these discoveries being put forth by scientists of the modern day are not new, in fact, and that the study of the universe and its beginnings have been known by the sages of Judaism and the great Kabbalists for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So I needed that to be understood, again, very clearly by everybody.
Let me ask you a question real fast. During our journey here, and even on the Israel News Talk Radio, are we going to have worksheets available for people to download, or whatever, notes that they can follow along with?
I think what we're going to do is, at some point, so the science of Kabbalah itself and some of the things that I'm speaking from are part of the volumes that I'm writing for Yeshiva Shoshanim. The course is called The Science of Kabbalah. Volume 2 should be up this week. Volume 1 is already available on Amazon in either paperback or Kindle. And Volume 2 should be up this week. I know it's in the queue to be put up on Amazon. So there are 2 volumes out. I think the first volume was about 40 pages, and the second volume I just put out was somewhere around 30 or 35 pages. They run between 30 or 40 pages each volume.
Okay.
Some of what we're talking about now is in Volume 2 of The Science of Kabbalah, and I'm already a third of the way through Volume 3, writing Volume 3. But so at some point, it would be good for people to buy these, and because there's more information in the volumes than what I'm sharing here on this show and what we'll be able to share on the radio.
Okay.
But because we want to make the radio show not just educational, we want to make it interesting as well, and talk about interesting things like we talked about, like those European rabbins and science and Kabbalah and how they connect and have different, like for instance, this young lady that I talked about that I hosted, she was she had a big corporate job in New York, and she just got burnt out, and she decided, not Jewish, not even B'nai Noach or anything, not religious, grew up Catholic, but secular. And she decided to take a year off. She was starting to study meditation, and she took a year off, and she's traveled for the last 8 months. She's been to like Bali. She's been to India. She's been to Dharamsala in Nepal, up where the Dalai Lama is, through the Himalayas. She's been to in Korea with some nuns. She's been like all over. And then she ended up in Tzfat. And she said, I had to come to Tzfat because I needed to come to the source. And so I thought it was very interesting that she talked about it. And she's now writing a book because she went to look on to find a book that would, speak about all these different things in meditation. And now she's learning about Hitbodedut and, Rabbi Nachman and learning from me. So she's actually going to be here for another 2 weeks in Israel. So she's somebody that I'm planning on interviewing on the show. to talk to her about what her interaction with Kabbalah was by coming to Tzfat, and how it affected her, and what she sees in it, and how she sees it differing from other religions that she's interacted with over the last 8 or 9 months. So we're going to have really interesting guests like that on as well.
Nice. That'd be cool.
Well, we're pretty close to the end here now.
Yes, sir.
So,
which is why we need your radio program.
Right. So anyway, what I was going to say is people can go on and either search for, it's probably the easiest thing to do is go and look for Rabbi Yitzchak Michelson, or just put Rabbi Michelson in Amazon, and it should come up, The Science of Kabbalah. Or you can go to my website, which is www.scienceofkabbalah.com.
I'll put it on screen.
KABBALAH.com. Scienceofkabbalah.com.
2 B's, 1 L.
2 B's, 1 L. And if you want to contact me by email, you can contact me at Rav Yitzchak at scienceofkabbalah.com. If you have any questions, and we encourage that. Also, I'm going to say, if people have questions or they want us to discuss certain things on the radio show, now's the time. You can also contact William. Contact William with questions that you want us to either handle here on Sunday nights on Kabbalah 101, or if you have questions or subjects that you want us to talk about on the new radio show, The Science of Kabbalah, let us know, so we'll discuss those on the radio show.
Excellent.
And if you are somebody out there that has an interesting story about your interaction with Kabbalah, contact us as well. Maybe we'll have you on the radio show and do an interview with you.
There you go.
So,
and you can send your questions to Knock Talk question related to knocktalkquestions@gmail.com. And of course you still have Rav Yitzchak's email on your screen right now. So awesome. Well, it's been fun. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I said I think we'll stop here rather than going on, because
right on. Not a problem.
The next section that I'm going to go into is a section to itself.
Right. That makes sense. Well, it's been fun for sure. You guys, don't forget, subscribe to the YouTube channel, turn on the notifications, and find Rabbi Yitzchak on Facebook if you have not his friend yet. Send him a friend request. I think you still got room for a few more. So, and then again, any questions you have, if you want for Tanakh Talk related, just send them to knocktalkquestions@gmail. Questions, topics you want to talk about here, or maybe on the radio show. And then Rav Yitzchak at scienceofkabbalah.com. You guys have a great week. Rabbi, it's always a pleasure, and we'll see you next time. Shalom, shalom.
חשוב מכל חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד. איפוק זו העוצמה, ויתור זו הגדולה, השאיפה והכמיהה. חושבים דוברים לובשים בכל האופנים, זה טבעם של אנשים שונים. נזכור בסוף כולנו שותפים.